Section 1 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. From the ancient Greek Odyssey, Ulysses and the Bag of Winds, retold by William H. Elson. Long, long ago, there lived upon a little island a Greek king named Ulysses. One time Ulysses sailed far away across the sea to fight for his country. 10 long years he was away from his beautiful wife and his little son. At last the Greeks captured the city they were fighting against, and the war ended. "Now I can go back to my island home," said Ulysses joyfully, as he and his men set sail for home. "Once more I can see my wife and son." On the way they stopped to rest at the home of a king named Aeolus, who lived on an island in the sea. It was a wonderful island. All around it was a high wall of bronze. Aeolus was king of the winds. He could make the winds sleep so soundly that the sea would be as smooth as glass, or he could make them blow so hard that the waves would be as high as mountains. When Ulysses was ready to start on his way again, Aeolus said, "I will help you to reach your home, Ulysses. I will put all the stormy winds in this great bag of ox hide. Then they cannot harm you. I will tie the bag with this golden chain, but I will leave out the gentle west wind to bear you safely home. Guard the bag of winds carefully, and do not let anyone untie the chain." Then the west wind blew softly and sent them safely on their way. For 9 days and nights Ulysses guarded the bag of winds, until at last he became very tired and sleepy. Now the men with Ulysses did not know what was in the great bag. "See how he guards it," they said. "Surely it has gold and silver in it, for it is tied with a golden chain. We helped Ulysses in the war. Why should he have all the gold and silver?" At last, on the 10th day, they came in sight of their dear island. "Look, look!" cried the men joyfully. "There are our green fields. Soon we shall see our homes." Then the weary Ulysses, thinking that he need not guard the bag any longer, fell fast asleep. "Now we can see what is in the bag," said his men. "We can get some of the gold and silver for ourselves." So they crept up to the bag and untied the golden chain. Out flew all the stormy winds, roaring and howling. In a moment great waves arose and drove the ship far from land. The noise of the wind and the waves awoke Ulysses. Where was his little island home? Where were the green fields he loved so well? They were far, far away, for the ship was out on the stormy sea. "Oh, what shall I do?" cried Ulysses. "I fear that I shall never see my home again. But I must not give up. I will try again and again. Some day I may reach my home and see my wife and son once more." After a long time, the stormy winds drove the ship back to the island where Aeolus lived. How glad Ulysses was when he saw the high wall of bronze. "Aeolus can help us," he said. "He will tie the winds again." But Aeolus was angry with Ulysses and his men. "Go away," he said. "I will not help you a second time, for it is your own fault that the stormy winds are out of the bag." So once more Ulysses set out upon the sea, and it was many long years before he saw his island home again. End of section 1, read by Alan Mapstone.
Section 2 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by George Banfield, April 2024. From the ancient Roman Aeneid, The Wanderings of Aeneas, retold by H.L. Havell. It was the first dawn of summer, and the green herb was already beginning to shoot among the blackened ruins of Troy, when the little fleet, bearing that shattered remnant of a mighty nation, put out into the deep. Tears dimmed the eyes of Aeneas and his men as they saw their native shores fade away into the distance behind them. The past was all sorrow, and the future was veiled in mystery and terror, but heaven's eternal eye was watching them, and a divine hand was held over them, guarding the sacred fire of Vesta, which they had brought with them from Troy's ancient altar, the undying germ of civic life. Aeneas first directed his course to the land of the Thracians, a warlike people bound to the Trojans by ties of friendship and alliance. Arrived there, he began to found a new city, called Aeneas, after his own name. One day he was preparing to offer a sacrifice to his goddess mother, and, seeking green boughs with which to adorn his altar, he saw a little mound near where he stood covered with a thick growth of myrtle. Pleased by the sight of his mother's favourite shrub, he began to pluck the green shoots, but the twigs were more than usually tough and seemed to resist his efforts like living things, and when at last one was torn away, he saw it dripping with a red fluid like blood. He wrenched off another, and the same crimson liquor was seen oozing from the wound. Determined to explore the meaning of this strange portent, he grasped the trunk of the bleeding myrtle tree and tugged with all his might, seeking to tear it up by the roots, when a dismal voice struck upon his ears, and he heard these words spoken from the centre of the mound. "Forbear, Aeneas, forbear. Rend not my heart, and defile not thy pious hands with a kinsman's blood. It is I, Polydorus, whom thou art torturing. Here I lie, murdered by the hand of my host. Here I fell, pierced by 100 javelins which have grown into a leafy tree. Fly, fly from this accursed shore, this land of cruelty and greed." Aeneas stood motionless and speechless, appalled by that strange message from the tomb and the tale of treachery and crime which it revealed. This Polydorus was Priam's youngest son, committed by his father with a great treasure to the charge of Polymestor, king of Thrace. The ruffian king, when he saw that Priam's star was on the wane, murdered his youthful guest and took possession of his gold. Full of sad thoughts, Aeneas sought counsel of Anchises and other Trojan elders, and told them that dark story of lawless outrage and broken faith. All were of one mind when they heard it. Clearly there was no resting place for them on that polluted shore. Having paid the last rites to the spirit of the murdered Polydorus, they abandoned the half-built walls of their intended city, and, embarking with their little host, set sail into the unknown sea. In the midst of the Aegean lies the little island of Delos. Ages ago it was a floating rock tossed like a ship without a rudder and driven from shore to shore, but Apollo's hand stayed its wanderings and rooted it with pillars of adamant to the bottom of the sea. Hither they are borne, not without the will of heaven, and cast anchor in a deep, sheltered bay. They are received with warm welcome by Aeneas, prince of Delos and priest of Phoebus, and an ancient friend of Anchises. Without delay, Aeneas enters the venerable temple of Apollo and offers prayer to Troy's trusty friend in his native seat. O thou, whose temple stands by the waterside, in the land of our birth, grant us a lasting home and an abiding city. Have pity on thy little flock, saved from the ravening wolves of Greece. Let thy light shine inward upon us, and give us a sign that we may know where to go and where to found our walls. Hardly had the prayer been uttered when the temple and the sacred laurel tree and the hill on which the temple stood were seized with trembling, and in the inner shrine was heard a deep and solemn sound. Aeneas kneeled, in awful reverence prone, and presently this answer was borne to his ears. Children of Dardanus, long-suffering hearts, the same land which gave birth to your first ancestor shall cherish you, his descendants, on its sheltering breast. Seek the ancient mother of your race. There the house of Aeneas shall found a worldwide empire, he and his children's children, and those that are born after them. The ancient mother of your race. What was the god's meaning, and whither was his voice summoning them? All turned to Anchises, who was famed for his prophetic skill, seeking an answer to the riddle, and he, after pondering long on the legends of ancient days, declared that Apollo's words pointed to Crete, the birthplace of Jove, their divine ancestor. There is Mount Ida, the cradle of our race. Thence came Teucer, and founded the first Trojan kingdom beneath the shadow of that other Ida. Thence brought he the worship of Cybele, with its holy silence and mystic, awful rites. The god calls us to Crete. 1,000 voices take up the cry, and after due offerings in thankfulness to Phoebus, they man their vessels and set out with joyful hearts for Crete. Over the blue Aegean, past many an enchanted isle, Naxos and Paros, and all the sister Cyclades. Southward they are wafted to the ancient birthplace of Jove. On the way they learn that Idomeneus, king of Crete and one of Troy's bitterest enemies, has abandoned his kingdom and migrated to a distant land. Accordingly when, after a 3 days' voyage, they make the coast of Crete, they find no one to oppose their landing, and at once set about founding a new settlement. The walls begin to rise, and the citadel, named Pergamus, towers in their midst. Every hand is busy with pickaxe and spade and plough, and young wives are setting their homes in order, when suddenly an unwholesome air came down from heaven on the growing colony, spreading blight on every green herb and wasting sickness on man and beast. The earth refused her increase, and famine and pestilence together threatened destruction to the brave little host. By the advice of Anchises, Aeneas determined to cross the sea again and inquire of the oracle at Delos the cause of this untoward event, but on the night before his intended departure, as he lay sleeping, he saw in a vision the household gods of Troy standing in the moonlight by the open window, and heard a voice which said, "Apollo bids us declare his will to thee here, and save thee that long journey. We have followed thee faithfully through all thy wanderings, and will never desert thee and thy race, for whom a glorious destiny is prepared, but not here. It is not in Crete, but in Italy that this green shoot from the shattered trunk of Dardanus is to be planted. There it shall strike deep root, and grow into a mighty tree, beneath whose spreading boughs all peoples of the earth shall be gathered together." When Anchises was informed of his son's nocturnal visitors, and of the message which they had brought, he recognized the name of Italy, which he had heard long ago from Cassandra as the destined home of the exiled Trojans. But who dreamed in those days, he said, that Cassandra was a true prophetess, or who thought that the line of Teucer would give kings to that far-off realm? We must obey. Phoebus cannot err. Away then, and follow whither his finger points us on. End of section 2.
Section 3 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. An Aesop's Fable. The Frogs Ask for a King, in Krylov's Fables, retold by Bernard Pars. Once in the froggies' favour, democracy had lost its savour. Life somehow seemed to them to lack a certain flavour, without a lord, beneath no sway. Their discontent to allay, they begged the gods to send a king without delay. though as a rule the gods don't care to list to trash. This once, however, Zeus, in answer to their prayer, sent them a king. Their king came hurtling through the air, and plumped upon their realm with such a smash that all their spongy state was squelching with the crash. With leaps and bounds in fright, the frogs went off full fling. They skipped aside to left and right, and in their holes withal they whispered of their king. And certainly the choice was happy as could fall. He was not fussy, was not heady, discreet and dignified and steady, with giant's girth as giant tall, in every detail worth his salt. He only had a single fault. This king was just a poplar log, that's all. At first, accounting him a personage too high, no subject dare approach, each trembles, halts, and blushes. They peep at him with fear, and that with half an eye, spy furtive from afar between the wind and rushes. Well, as the world has nothing strange on which the eye will not get used to range, so too these frogs, who first with fear stood faltering, at last came crawling up with homage to their king. Some still abashed before such pride, but soon the sprightliest will boldly turn his side, or try it on by squatting near. Some sporting frog, with spirit and with grit, will even show the king his rear. The king is kind, he does not mind a bit. And next, whoever likes, as all grow bold and bolder, will jump upon his shoulder. In 3 short days, this king had bored them to perdition. The frogs put in a new petition that Jupiter would send to rule their marshy state, a king that was a king indeed. He to their earnest prayers gave heed, and sent them down a stork to be their potentate. This king is no mere blockhead, never budging. Indulgence, not that way his princely nature lies. He eats the guilty up, and at his high assize there's none that's not amiss. In short, it comes to this. At breakfast and at lunch, at supper too, he's judging. In all that marshy quarter, the year goes swart and swarter. The census of the frogs is always running shorter. The king from morn to eve goes stalking round their town, and every frog that on his path he spies, he judges straight and gulps him down. Now worse than e'er before, the groans and prayers arise that Jupiter again would make a change of sovereign. Our present king, they cry, like flies he snuffs us out. It is not safe, we well may cry alack, to show a guileless nose or give a harmless quack. In short, this autocrat is worse than any drought. Why had you not the sense to live in peace before? Was it not I, poor fools, declared the voice from heaven, to whom no moment's rest was given? Not you, that dinned my ears a ruler to implore. You had a king, too mild he was and quiet. In all your swamp you raised a riot. A second king is come, a cruel one and fierce. Well, learn to live with him, or look for even worse. End of section 3, read by Alan Mapstone.
Section 4 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Section 4. A Medieval European Legend, Herod and the Bubbles, retold by F.J.H. Darton. There was an emperor of Rome, Herod by name, the richest man in all Christendom. He had at his court 7 wise masters to give him counsel. All that the emperor did was done by their advice. They were nigh as rich as Herod himself, for all men who sought office or power or reward gave them presents in order that through them the emperor's favor might be won. It befell upon a day that the emperor rode out to hunt, but as he passed the gate of Rome, a sudden blindness came upon him. He could see nothing, nor could any man there avail to give him back his sight. He was as blind as a stone. The 7 wise masters read their books and put forth all their magic arts, but could do naught to cure the emperor. At length the man bethought him of the sage Merlin, the wise man that never had a father. Merlin, he said, could cure the emperor if it was in the power of man. So Merlin was sent for and brought before the emperor, who told him the evil that had befallen him. Sir, quoth Merlin boldly, come to your bedchamber, and I will solve this evil. They went to the king's bedchamber, and Merlin told them his thoughts. Under your bed, Sir Emperor, far down, there is a great cauldron of water, boiling day and night, with 7 bubbles in it. So long as the bubbles boil, your sight will never come back. The emperor marveled at this strange saying, but Merlin bade him remove the bed and the floor to see if his words were not true. It was done as he said. They dug deep into the ground beneath the floor of the bedroom, and there, hidden in the earth, lay a wondrous cauldron, in which water was forever boiling. And on the water there were always 7 great bubbles floating. All men wondered thereat, and it was told to the emperor. Merlin, what marvel is this that I am told? Asked Herod. Sire, I will tell you what it is, he answered. These 7 bubbles signify 7 evil spirits who do always abide near you. They are your 7 wise masters. They take your wealth, Sir Emperor, and turn aside your justice by receiving bribes. They have done away with the old customs of this land and brought in new and evil ways. You are blind to them and see them not, even as you saw not these great bubbles till I revealed them. Heaven struck you with blindness in your eyes because of the blindness of your heart. Tell me then, magician, what shall I do to be rid of this double enchantment, the 7 sages and the 7 bubbles? Thus and thus, sire, said Merlin, and he bade him first take and behead the chief of the wise masters. Even as his head is struck off, he said, the greatest bubble in the cauldron will vanish, and thereafter you must behead every one of these evil masters if you would be rid of your blindness. There and then Herod sent for the chief of the wise masters and slew him by the side of the cauldron. Even as the man's head was struck off, all the court looked at the cauldron, and lo, the greatest bubble was there no longer. By Saint Martin, you speak true, said the emperor when he heard of it. Henceforth I will do all that you counsel. You will never regain your sight, sire, answered Merlin, until you have slain all these 7 evil men. They shall die, every one, said the emperor, and forthwith they were all put to death. As they died, the great bubbles vanished in turn, and when they were all gone, the emperor received his sight again. He rode out at the city gate to see if the sight were truly restored, or if it would once more be taken from him at the gate. But he came safely through the gate into the green fields outside, and his sight was not taken away. And there he fell on his knees and thanked God for the wonder that had been wrought by the wisdom of Merlin. End of section 4. Read by Lisa.
Section 5 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A legend from northern Italy, King Laurin's Rose Garden, retold by Karl Felix Wolff. To the east of Bozen rises a strange, uneven mass of mountains, called the Rose Garden, because on clear evenings the alpine glow is reflected there so vividly that you might think a rose-red flood had poured down over the barren rocks. But the people who live within sight of the Rose Garden tell the following legend. In ancient times there grew on the high mountains east of Bozen a real rose garden, so filled with flowers that in the sunlight it seemed a soft, rose-colored mass. This garden kingdom belonged to the dwarf king, Laurin, who lived there with his people. Deep within the mountains Laurin had many secret rooms and storehouses full of glittering jewels and gold, and to protect his kingdom in this treasure he had, instead of a wall or a moat, a silken thread. It was drawn around the rose garden, and whoever crossed it must fight the king. He was only a dwarf, but he was skillful in the use of magic arms. Laurin, returning one day from a distant country, brought back with him to the rose garden the lovely princess Semilda. He wished to make her his queen, but Semilda, who had come against her will, would listen neither to entreaties nor threats, and in a short time her brother, discovering where she was, came to set her free, bringing with him Dietrich of Bern and several other warriors. When they suddenly beheld the rose garden, they halted, overcome by its beauty. All but one, the ferocious Witiga, who rushed forward and, cutting the silken barrier, opened the battle. The warriors had counted on an easy victory, but Laurin exerted all the power of his magic weapons and combined with it the aid of 5 giants. Nevertheless, the warriors conquered. Laurin was taken captive and carried to Bozen, where they planned to make him court buffoon. Laurin was silent and uncomplaining. At last a day came when he was left unguarded. He fled from the court, quickly reached the outskirts of Bozen, and began the perilous journey back to his mountains. As his eyes clung to the vivid light of the distant rose garden, he suddenly realized that the glow was a curse to him, for its light could be seen from the depths of the lowest valleys. Everyone marveled at it, and everyone sought, and often found the source. The dwarf king determined to make his kingdom invisible. It should no longer be observed from the valleys. When people could not see it, they would lose their desire to visit it. So he laid a magic spell on the rose garden, a spell making it invisible in daytime and at night. But Laurin had forgotten the twilight, which is neither day nor night. And in the twilight of every clear evening, the flowers of the rose garden spread their soft rosy curtain over the mysterious high spires of rock, and their warm radiance dominates the mountains and valleys, as it did in the old days before dwarfs and men were enemies. Today we call this light the alpine glow, and when it spreads over the peaks of the rose garden, the people in the valley come out to gaze in wonder. But they know nothing of that older time when men were kinder and the world more beautiful. End of section 5. Section 6 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A legend from Ireland, Princess Fior Usga, retold by Thomas Crofton Croker. A little way beyond the gallows green of Cork, and just outside the town, there is a great loch of water, where people in the winter go and skate for the sake of diversion. But the sport above the water is nothing to what is under it. For at the very bottom of this loch there are buildings and gardens far more beautiful than any now to be seen, and how they came there was in this manner. Long before Saxon foot pressed Irish ground, there was a great king called Cork, whose palace stood where the loch now is, in a round green valley, that was just a mile about. In the middle of the courtyard was a spring of fair water, so pure and so clear that it was the wonder of all the world. Much did the king rejoice at having so great a curiosity within his palace. But as people came in crowds from far and near to draw the precious water of this spring, he was sorely afraid that in time it might become dry. So he caused a high wall to be built up around it, and would allow nobody to have the water, which was a very great loss to the poor people living about the palace. Whenever he wanted any for himself, he would send his daughter to get it, not liking to trust his servants with the key of the well door, fearing they might give some away. One night the king gave a grand entertainment, and there were many great princes present, and lords and nobles without end. And there were wonderful doings throughout the palace. There were bonfires, whose blaze reached up to the very sky, and dancing was there, to such sweet music that it ought to have waked up the dead out of their graves. And feasting was there in the greatest of plenty for all who came. Nor was anyone turned away from the palace gates, but "You're welcome, heartily," was the porter's salute for all. Now it happened at this grand entertainment, there was one young prince above all the rest, mighty comely to behold, and as tall and as straight as ever eye could wish to look on. Right merrily did he dance that night with the old king's daughter, wheeling there as light as a feather, and footing it away to the admiration of everyone. The musicians played the better for seeing their dancing, and they danced as if their lives depended upon it. After all this dancing came the supper, and the young prince was seated at the table beside the side of his beautiful partner, who smiled upon him as often as he spoke to her, and that was by no means so often as he wished, for he had constantly to turn to the company and thank them for the many compliments passed upon his fair partner and himself. In the midst of this banquet one of the great lords said to King Cork, "May it please your majesty, here is everything in abundance that heart can wish for, both to eat and drink, except water." "Water," said the king, mightily pleased at some one calling for that of which purposely there was a want. "Water shall you have, my lord, speedily, and that of such a delicious kind that I challenge all the world to equal it." "Daughter," said he, "go fetch some in the golden vessel which I caused to be made for the purpose." The king's daughter, who was called Fior Usga, which signifies in English spring water, did not much like to be told to perform so menial a service before so many people, and though she did not venture to refuse the commands of her father, yet hesitated to obey him, and looked down upon the ground. The king, who loved his daughter very much, seeing this, was sorry for what he had desired her to do, but having said the word, he was never known to recall it. He therefore thought of the way to make his daughter go speedily and fetch the water, and it was by proposing that the young prince, her partner, should go along with her. Accordingly, with a loud voice he said, "Daughter, I wonder not at your fearing to go alone so late at night, but I doubt not the young prince at your side will go with you." The prince was not displeased at hearing this, and taking the golden vessel in one hand, with the other led the king's daughter out of the hall so gracefully that all present gazed after them with delight. When they came to the spring of water, in the courtyard of the palace, the fair Usga unlocked the door with the greatest care, and stooping down with the golden vessel to take some of the water out of the well, found the vessel so very heavy that she lost her balance and fell in. The young prince tried in vain to save her, for the water rose and rose so fast that the entire courtyard was speedily covered with it, and he hastened back almost in a state of distraction to the king. The door of the well being left open, the water, which had been so long confined, rejoiced at obtaining its liberty, rushed forth incessantly, every moment rising higher, and was in the hall of the entertainment sooner than the young prince himself, so that when he attempted to speak to the king he was up to his neck in water. At length the water rose to such a height that it filled the entire length of the green valley in which the king's palace stood, and so the present loch of Cork was formed. Yet the king and his guests were not drowned, as would now happen if such an awful indignation were to take place. Neither was his daughter, the fair Usga, who returned to the banquet hall the very next night after this dreadful event, and every night since the same entertainment and dancing goes on in the palace in the bottom of the loch, and will last until someone has the luck to bring up out of it the golden vessel which was the cause of all this mischief. Nobody can doubt that it was a judgment upon the king for his shutting up the well in the courtyard from the poor people, and if there are any who do not credit my story, they may go and see the Loch of Cork, for there it is to be seen to this day. The road to Kinsale passes at one side of it, and when its waters are low and clear, the tops of towers and stately buildings may be plainly viewed in the bottom by those who have good eyesight, without the help of spectacles. End of section 6.
Section 7 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Paul Bunyan story from the USA, The Growing Boy, retold by James Cloyd Bowman. The young fir trees were right. Little did the wise old white pine know of the future when he spread the report that none of the trees would live to see another blue moon. And when he told them that they were fools to dream of the coming of a great hero, who was certainly ignorant of what was happening. On the other side of the father of inland lakes, far beyond the line where the sky seemed to meet and mingle with the water, there was the strangest boy that had ever been heard in all of the history of the world. His name was Paul Bunyan. He had the blackest hair and the bluest eyes that ever were. There was a big dimple in his shining red cheek, and the corners of his mouth were always turned up. The strangest thing about him, however, was the fact that he was growing at the rate of 6 inches a day, and at the end of each week he was 349 pounds heavier than he had been the week before. He lived in a big, rambling shanty that was built of unhewn logs and covered with the skins of all the various wild animals of the forest. Each week he had the job of tearing out one end of his shanty and of adding 12 feet to its length to make room for himself. And every month he had to add an additional story to its ceiling to keep from bumping his head. One month he was so busy dreaming about what he was going to do when he grew to manhood that he forgot all about enlarging his living quarters. He awoke one morning to find that he must have threshed about a good deal in his dreams. He was always a dreamer, but this dream was a whopper. He discovered, first, that he had completely demolished the entire end of his shanty and that he had uprooted 4 square miles of the finest pine timber that ever grew in the Dominion of Canada. He wondered what in the world had made him so very restless during the night, and then he began to recall his dream. "I was dreaming," he said, and began laughing to himself, "that I was the boss of the largest camp of shanty boys in all the history of logging. The camp itself covered 22 square miles of stumpage, and the men were as thick as bees going in and out of their work. And the funniest part of all, I was leading an enormous blue ox that took the tops of 12 of the tallest spruces at a single bite. No wonder I kicked down so many trees, for the old ox pulled me around something awful. At times I touched the ground only once in 5 miles. Yes, and when I got the big brute to stop, I measured him. He was so enormous that he measured the length of 47 axe handles and a plug of tobacco between the eyes. He was so long that I had to have a telescope when I was leading him to see what his hind legs were doing. When he ran, he covered a mile at a single step, and he shook things up more than an earthquake. He once dragged me over the top of the tallest white pine in the forest. No wonder I kicked down 4 square miles of tall timber with such a dream as that," Paul laughed. "But the trees aren't wasted, at that. I'll need 'em all for enlarging my shanty before the year is over, if I keep on growing at the rate I'm growing now." And almost before he had finished speaking, he began rubbing his eyes and pinching his great arms and thighs, and kicking the end of a log furiously with his bare toes. He couldn't believe his eyes, for in front of him, as big as life and twice as real, nodded the enormous head of a red ox. The head was so large that it filled one whole end of Paul's shanty. The nose sniffed curiously, and the eyes of Green Carbuncle smiled kindly as if to say, "Well, here I am." All Paul's doubt fled in a hurry when the tongue shot out and gave him a wet dap across his dimpled cheek. Paul instinctively took a step backward and reached for his axe, but the huge ox continued to smile so kindly that Paul soon understood that he wanted to say, "At your service, master." Thus began a friendship that was destined to mean more to the logging world than anything else that ever happened. "Babe, your name shall be Babe," Paul shouted in glee as he placed the ox's head over his shoulder and patted his face. And Babe, the ox's name, has remained to this day. For the remainder of the year, Paul was the busiest boy south of the North Pole. Each week he carefully enlarged his shanty, and between whiles he started to build a stable for Babe. His axe was never silent. He slashed the mighty pines as rapidly as an ordinary boy would cut up matches with his jackknife. And when he was not chopping logs, he was busy hunting food for Babe and himself. He was so hurried that he was forced to jump around on the wings of the wind. He soon became so expert that he could leap 3.5 miles at a single jump, and before the year was over, he had completely stripped the edible moose moss from 7,000 square miles of forest and upland. Even then, the great Babe was ever hungry. Besides, Paul had himself to feed. When he was carrying home a huge bundle of moss across his shoulder, he would usually manage to find time to pick up 2 or 3 moose or a half-dozen deer. These he would push into the bottom of his Mackinaw pockets. During this time, he ate 4 entire herds of deer, 17 black bears, and a 100 moose. Even then, during a whole month, Babe worked up such an enormous appetite and kept up such a terrible bellowing whenever he was hungry that Paul was overworked. He didn't have the time to eat what he needed to nourish his growing body. The result was that he suddenly stopped growing. And after he stopped growing, he never started again. "It doesn't matter much if I've stopped growing," Paul consoled himself. "I'm almost large enough to do an ordinary man's work anyway." The truth was that Paul could see over all of the trees except the highest tamaracks. He was so strong that he could take up the largest pine and twist it into splinters as easily as an average boy can bend the small limb of a lilac bush. His feet were so large that it took a dozen full-grown bull moose skins to make him a single pair of moccasins. When he needed a new Mackinaw jacket, the woolen mills of Lowell, Massachusetts had to work 2 weeks, running 3 shifts a day, to weave enough cloth to make him the single garment. And there was never a pair of scales invented that was large enough to record his weight. When he traveled through the sand, he sometimes sank up to his knees, and 2 or 3 different times, when he was carrying a heavy load, he left his footprints in the hardest granite rock. Years later, a noted scientist who happened along that way mistook these tracks for those of a dinosaur of the age of mammoths. By the middle of the winter, Paul had a part of Babe's stable completed, so that the big ox could find shelter for his head, neck, and forequarters. If he had only been an ostrich, this would have been more than sufficient shelter. But of course, being an ox, Babe liked to feel that he was entirely under cover. As it was, the barn was as high as the Woolworth Building of New York City, and 4.5 times as long. But before Paul could get the stable finished, a strange spell of weather overtook him. He awoke early one morning to find that a dazzling blue haze had settled over everything. Paul hurried into his moose-skin moccasins and his Mackinaw, thrust his head into his beaver cap, and left his shanty at a bound. Soon he was miles away, gathering moss for Babe. He had hardly collected his bundle of moss when he heard a terrible rumble that grew louder every second. He straightened himself and stood on tiptoe until he could see across the top of the trees. The sight that met his eyes was stranger than any dream he had ever dreamed. A wall of dazzling blue cloud arose along the horizon. As it advanced, Paul became aware of a great scurry of wings. All the blue ganders in all creation were leading their flocks, and flying for their lives, and jabbering their fear to one another as they shot across the sky. The next minute Paul was aware that herds of moose and deer were bumping his shins. He simply reached down and filled his Mackinaw pockets. A big black bear started up his trouser for protection. Paul immediately tucked him away in the folds of his beaver cap, where the bear at once started his hibernating sleep for the winter. Then throwing the bundle of moss over his shoulder, Paul galloped home ahead of the storm. Babe was threshing around and moaning and bellowing, because he couldn't get himself entirely under shelter. Paul barely had time to throw him his bundle of moss and to retreat into his own shack when the storm broke. And it was the strangest storm that was ever known, and nobody would have believed it if it hadn't been foretold for so many centuries. Before the coming of the blue moon, there will come the winter of the blue snow, the prophets had been saying, for nobody knew how long. The air was suddenly filled with glistening blue snowflakes. The blue wind romped and roared and played a harsh, grating melody on the swaying pines. Paul sat at his window and watched the storm as long as he could see the blue snow as it piled and drifted and covered all the landscape. But the longer the storm raged, the darker it became, until all that Paul could see finally was a swirl of blue maiden-like forms scurrying into the blueness that covered everything. Paul finally moved from the window, threw a half-dozen pine trees into his fireplace, and proceeded to get his dinner. He pulled 3 deer and a bull moose from his pocket, skinned them, broiled them on spits before the fire, and quickly ate them. By this time it was so dark that Paul stretched his enormous body across his shanty, covered himself with the loose skins from the pile in the corner, and went to sleep. How long he slept he never knew, but, judging by the size of his appetite when he awoke, he thought it must have been at least a month. He felt as empty as Mammoth Cave. "I believe I could eat up the whole of outdoors, if only I could get it into my mouth," he said to himself. He sat up stiffly and dreamily rubbed his eyes. This was the first time in his life that he could not remember his dream. Then he lumbered awkwardly to his feet. When he opened the door of his shanty, he thought he was opening the door to a new life. For a full half day, he simply leaned against his shanty door and imagined he was in the land of the blue fairies. Everywhere he looked, there was a sparkle of blue. The ground, the trees, the sky, everything was shining sapphire. The air was so sweet and warm that it seemed to caress Paul. He had never before experienced such sweet joy. And while he leaned against the door and whistled a soothing spring melody, he thought he had a whiff of the sweetest perfume this side of Arabia. Suddenly, and without warning, there stood before him a beautiful lady, dressed all in shining blue. She was almost as tall as Paul, but she stood so lightly that even her toes seemed hardly to leave their imprint in the blue snow. "I am the good spirit sent from the blue moon." The lady smiled as the delightful liquid music flowed from her lips. "You are in high favor. I am sent to bring you a message." Paul was so bashful that he instinctively tried to hide his clumsy hands. He brushed a bright scarlet, and the playful dimple on his left cheek tried in vain to jump out of sight. The lady only smiled. "You shall never grow old," she said. "You shall always be a boy with a big heart, and you shall always be a dreamer. My special message is to tell you that with the coming of spring you are to go forth to free the forests from their long bondage. You are to carry them away so they can see the world and become a part of it. For the past month, while you have been sleeping, the blue moon has been playing across the heavens. It has been foretold around the world for 1,000 years that with the coming of the blue moon, a great hero will arise. You, Paul Bunyan, are that hero. Take Babe, the blue ox, with you wherever you go, to be your helper and your companion. Your name is already written among the stars. You will be forever famous." With a waft of her hand and a wistful smile, the beautiful blue maiden vanished over the treetops, and Paul stood waving his arms wildly and calling to her to return. "My babe is a red ox, not a blue ox," he shouted after her. But all the good that his calling did was that it awakened Babe, who now let out such a terrible bellow that Paul rushed to the stable to see what was wrong. The sight that met his eyes would have seemed a dream had it not been for the words of the beautiful maiden. For there stood Babe, with big, shining blue eyes, and hair that held the sheen of the blue rabbits that play under the snows under the blue sky of the midnight sun. The blue ox was to Paul a symbol. Babe proved that the beautiful maiden had told him the truth. The spring wind was melting the blue snow on all sides, and the world of green was beginning to peep through to behold the wonderful sight. Paul got his axes and his skins together, and was ready to move off into the unknown to find his waiting fortune. End of section 7, read by Neil Bredauer.
Section 8 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Section 8. A Pueblo Native American Story, Coyote and Evening Star, retold by Ahlee James. This is the story told by Bird on Tree in Indian and translated into English by Evergreen Mountain. Long, long ago, at Taba in the hills, lived some gulls. One day they were getting ready to fly to the sea, and Coyote, who had been friendly with these birds and envied their power of flight, told them that he wanted to go with them. "How can you?" asked the gulls, laughing, as he looked up at them imploringly. "Can you run as fast as we can fly?" "No," answered Coyote, "but if you will make me wings, I can fly and go with you to the wonderful sea." The gulls considered this, and then told him that if he would get them some stiff cloth, they would make him a pair of wings. Coyote secured the cloth and brought it to the gulls. They took it, and after considerable studying and planning, made a very good pair of wings and fastened them to his shoulders. Coyote was delighted with their gift. He was even more delighted when he found that he could really fly. Indeed, he was so pleased that he did not mind the laughter of the gulls as he rose from the ground and joined them in their journey. On and on they flew through all that day and into the night, when they came to San Juan River. There they stopped to rest and spend the night. The birds sank to the water. As Coyote was trying to do everything they did, he lowered himself to the river also, but his wings soon became water-soaked. He began to sink. The gulls laughed at him, but helped him to the bank, and there he dried his wings and went to sleep, for he was very tired. Next morning they started forth again, and after flying a long way over woods and prairies, mountains and hills, they saw a village in a valley between two hills. This was Star Village, and the Star people lived there, with Evening Star for their chief. "Must we go over that village?" asked Coyote. His companions told him that they must. This made Coyote nervous, for he feared the Star people would look up and laugh at his queer figure flying over them. "If you think about what is below," admonished the gulls, "you will forget about your flying, and then you will surely fall. Do not think of anything but flying as we pass over the village." Soon they were passing over the town, and the Star people looked up and saw them. They admired the gulls, but when they saw the legs of Coyote dangling under his queer, stiff wings, they began to laugh loudly and make fun of him. "When did Coyote learn to fly?" they called. Their peals of laughter rose to the unhappy animal, and he began to waver in his flight. "Think of nothing but flying," cautioned the gulls. But despite his efforts to follow their instructions, he heard the jeers and taunts below and began to lose confidence. "Look at the earth-made wings!" screamed the Star people. "See the grace of the gull's wings that were made by Mother Life, and the stiffness of vain Coyote, who would have wings even though the Great Mother has not given them to him. He was made for the ground. Look at his queer motions with his funny stiff wings. He wants to be a gull. Ho, ho, ho." Coyote tried hard to center his thoughts on flying, but he could not. His manufactured wings began to waver, then fail him, and after a few vain flaps to regain his balance, he fell to the ground in the very midst of his tormentors. The gulls were sorry for their unhappy friend, but they could not help him, so kept on in their flight. One of their wise ones remarking, "He would have wings, yet would not obey our instructions, so he must take the consequences." Rushing to where he had fallen, the Star people stripped Coyote of his wings and took him prisoner. They entrusted him to the care of a guard, who was instructed to keep strict watch on him and not let him escape. After all the jeering people, except his guard, had gone, the poor beast was very unhappy and begged the keeper to set him free. The Starman refused for a long time, but finally, weary from Coyote's pleading, told him if he would pay a certain number of shell and turquoise beads, he would let him go. So Coyote gave his jailer all the pretty turquoise and shell beads he had, and the jailer gave him his freedom. As Coyote was running away from the village, glad to be free again even though he had been foiled in his flying trip, he saw Evening Star shining in the west. The sight of his bright, happy face made Coyote angry, so he began to laugh and make fun of Evening Star, as the Star people had made fun of him. Evening Star shone on him fiercely, but the brighter the star shone, the more Coyote laughed and jeered at him. Finally, Evening Star grew angry, and leaving his place in the sky, started after the laughing beast. Coyote had thought that the Star Chief would not dare leave his place in the sky. He was frightened now, for he feared that Evening Star would burn him up. He wished for the wings of a gull to take him away, but not having wings, he used his 4 feet and ran so fast that Evening Star had hard work to follow. Still, no matter how swiftly Coyote ran, Evening Star was swifter, and the foolish animal saw that he would be overtaken. Then he looked up at an owl sitting on her eggs and begged, "Oh, Owl, please hide me from Evening Star, or he will surely burn me up." Owl felt sorry for Coyote's plight, so she spread her wide wing over him and just had him hidden when Evening Star burst into view, blinding the night bird with his brilliant light. He saw Owl and asked, "Which way did Coyote go?" "I do not know," answered Owl, trying to see with her big eyes in the bright light. "He came this way," said Evening Star angrily. "I'll teach him to make fun of me." Owl knew that the Star Chief was furious and would surely burn Coyote up if he caught him, and she wished to get rid of the brilliance that was hurting her eyes. Nodding her great bushy head, she said, "He went that way," and Evening Star ran in the direction she nodded. When the great light was gone, Coyote came out from under the sheltering wing, and when he thought of how narrowly he had escaped, he thanked Owl for her protection. Then he laughed loud with glee. He had outwitted the chief of the Star People. Evening Star finally went back to his place in the sky. Coyote, thinking the bright fellow, quivering there from fatigue, would not want another chase soon, foolishly showed himself and jeered again, calling his recent pursuer names. The Star Chief watched him a while, giving himself time to rest, and then, without the faintest warning, jumped to earth and again started after Coyote. The rush was so sudden that Coyote was almost caught, and his fur was even singed before he collected his wits enough to run away. When he did start, fear lent speed to his legs. He ran as never before, but Evening Star was very close. Coyote looked around for friendly aid and heard little Bluebird as she sat on her nest. Looking up, he implored, "Oh, Bluebird, hide me under your pretty wing. Evening Star is after me and will surely burn me up if he catches me." "How can I hide a big creature like you?" asked Bluebird. "Use your magic!" cried Coyote desperately as fiery brilliance told him that Evening Star was almost upon him. Bluebird was sorry to see Coyote in so much trouble. She used her magic, and just before Evening Star reached the tree where her nest was hidden, the little bird made Coyote very small and covered him with her wing, hiding him from his pursuer. "Where did that mocking Coyote go?" asked Evening Star, seeing the blue mother bird on her nest. "He passed on by," said Bluebird, and Evening Star again took up the chase. After he was gone, Coyote came out of his hiding place and felt a wonderful relief at being free again. His size came back, and he began to laugh yet another time to think that he had foiled the fierce Star Chief. "Hush your silly laughter," said Bluebird. "After this, behave yourself, for wood creatures will refuse to hide you any more. Evening Star has done you no harm, and you have no business to make fun of him." "His people made fun of me and took me prisoner," said Coyote defensively. "Because you were trying to be something you were not," answered Bluebird, for she knew of Coyote's silly adventure with the wings. "You asked me to use my magic to hide you," she continued. "I did so because I did not want you burnt up. But the next time you mock at Evening Star, I will use my magic another way and tell him where you are, for I shall know. Then you will be burnt up sure enough." Coyote knew she would do as she said. So he went home, humiliated by the warning of little Bluebird, and for a long time he behaved himself as a respectable coyote should. End of section 8. Read by Lisa. Section 9 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Section 9. A Dakota Native American Story. The Story of White Dawn, retold by Winona Blanche Allanson. The Story of White Dawn, the Maiden Who Loved the West Wind. White Dawn was the loveliest of all the maidens. Fair was she as the new-born morn, and beautiful as the night in the moon of the ginseng berries. Of all the maidens of the tribe, she was the most loved. Many sought her, but she would have none of them. She turned away. Then one day, as she walked in the wood and gathered the leaves and stalks of the sumac to be used for the coloring of the porcupine quills, a youth came toward her. He was a stranger, slender and lithe and handsome. Golden bronze was his skin. Golden was the single eagle feather thrust carelessly in the band confining his black hair, and soft and dark were his eyes as the waters of a deep lagoon. The soft colors of the dying sunset were caught in the woven porcupine quills that adorned his Greek cloth, while his belt of wampum was the hue of blackest night. Long he walked and talked with the maiden and helped her gather the leaves of the sumac. And White Dawn was glad. She returned to the village, her heart singing as the bird sings his morning prayer to the Great Spirit, Father of all. "Will he come again?" she whispered softly to herself as she entered the wood the next day. As before, he met her and helped her gather the sumac. Thus for many days he appeared and walked with her. Then one day he spoke. "Far off in the land of the dying sun, by the side of the shining waters, I have built my lodge. There the north wind shall never harm you, nor shall you know hunger, but always will you have happiness and love. Will you return with me?" Long did White Dawn hesitate, for she was loath to leave her people. At last, however, she consented, and together they set out for the lodge by the shining waters in the land of the dying sun. For many moons they traveled, and finally reached the white doeskin lodge of the husband. There White Dawn found all eaten as he had told her. Happy then was she. Long moons passed, and then White Dawn became troubled. Her husband went on long journeys, and when he returned, he moved slowly as an old man. Then would White Dawn cook the most savory of dishes, and watch over and care for him tenderly until he was entirely rested. Then, after lingering with her for several suns at the beautiful lodge by the shining waters, he would depart again. At last White Dawn said, "My husband, is the company of White Dawn less pleasing to you than when you met her gathering sumac in the wood?" "No," answered her husband. "Then why, unlike the braves of her people, for many moons do you desert your lodge and make desolate the heart of White Dawn?" "Love I more, not less, the beautiful maiden who left her people that she might gladden my lodge in the land of the dying sun. But I have work to do, and so must leave. Always, however, I long for White Dawn." "Be content," replied the husband. And White Dawn was content for a time. Then she grew restless and again questioned her husband. "What is the work that calls my husband afar?" she asked. "He follows not the chase, for he kills his meat here. What then is his work?" Her husband shook his head, but said nothing. Still White Dawn persisted in questioning him. "Sad is the heart of the brave with the feather of gold," said her husband, "for I am the west wind." White Dawn shivered as though the north wind had touched her, but her husband stood straight and tall before her as on that first day in the wood. "Alas, my husband!" cried White Dawn. "Must the soul of White Dawn wander always through the beautiful forests of the happy land without you?" Slowly, sadly, her husband bowed his head in acquiescence. "My work is here," he answered. "Would that I could remain always with you instead, for great is the love of White Dawn," wailed his wife. The husband raised his head quickly, a glad light in his eyes. "Truly the love of White Dawn is a wondrous thing. It shall be as she wishes." A moment, then all had vanished. White Dawn, brave with the feather of gold, and the white doeskin lodge. But where the loved White Dawn had stood, there rose a tree, tall, straight, and beautiful, a first pine, and through its branches sounded the voice of the brave with the feather of gold. And e'en today, the singing of the pines is but the voice of the west wind, whispering his love to his beautiful White Dawn maiden. End of section 9. Read by Lisa.
Section 10. of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Tlingit Native American Story. Beaver and Porcupine. Retold by Elizabeth Bishop Johnson. A porcupine and a beaver were once very good friends. They went about together and talked to each other about what they had been doing. Now, the beaver is afraid of the bear because whenever the bear finds a beaver's dam, he breaks it up so that all the water runs down. Then he catches the beaver and eats him. But the bear is afraid of the porcupine's sharp quills. So the porcupine sometimes stays in the beaver's house, which is always dry on the inside, to help him in time of danger. If the water above the dam begins to get low, they both know that the bear must be there. Then the porcupine tells the beaver to stay inside until he goes out to look around. When the bear sees the porcupine, he is afraid of his sharp quills and goes away. Then the beavers all begin repairing their dam while Porcupine acts as guard. Porcupine finds his food in the bark and sap of trees. Once he said to the beaver, "I am hungry, and I want to go to my own place." He invited the beaver to go up into a tree with him, but the beaver cannot climb trees, so the porcupine told him to wait below while he went up to eat. Soon they saw the bear coming, and the beaver called, "Partner, what shall I do? The bear is coming nearer." Then the porcupine slid down the tree very quickly and said, "Lay your head close to my back." In that way he helped the beaver up to the top of the tree. After a while, Porcupine came down and left Beaver up in the tree. Beaver wondered how he could get down and begged Porcupine to help him. But Porcupine would not listen and went off to play with some other porcupines in a hole in the rocks. Finally, a squirrel, who is another friend of the beaver, came and helped him down from the tree. By and by, when Porcupine came back, he saw Beaver swimming in the lake. Beaver called to him to come down to the lake, saying, "Partner, let us go out to the middle of the lake. If you put your head on the back of my head, you will not get wet at all." When Porcupine had done as Beaver directed, Beaver said, "Hold on tight," and they started. The beaver would flap his tail on the water and dive way down below. Then he would come to the surface, flap his tail, and go down again. He kept on doing this until they came to an island in the center of the lake. Here Beaver put Porcupine ashore and went flapping away in the same manner. Now the little porcupine wandered about over the island, not knowing how to get off. He climbed a tree and came down again, climbed another tree and came down. This he kept on doing for a long time. Finally, he began to call to some of his animal friends on the mainland, asking them to come and help him. He called especially to the wolverine, who lived on the mainland nearby, because he thought that if the wolverine came, perhaps the north wind would blow so that the lake would freeze over. The wolverine heard him and asked him what he wanted. Porcupine then sang the song which meant that he wanted to go home. So, after a time, the whole lake was frozen over, and Porcupine could run across the smooth ice to where he lived. But the beaver and the porcupine were no longer friends. End of section 10. Read by Gila Labinger-Freeberg. Napa, April 8th, 2024. Section 11 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. African American Stories. Rabbit Tales, collected by Arthur Huff Fauset. Rabbit ties Fox's tail to the dead horse. Once Fox and Rabbit had a crop together. So Rabbit wanted all the crop, and Fox wanted all of it too. So Rabbit went out somewhere to study a plan to get all the crop. He was walking along the road and found a horse. So he ran over to Fox and said, "Guess what I found? A dead horse. Come on with me and we'll carry him off somewhere." So Fox went with Rabbit to the horse. So Rabbit said, "I'm gonna plait your tail to the horse's tail, and you will pull while I push." So Rabbit had the whip. When he plaited the tails, he whipped the horse, and the horse wasn't dead. When Rabbit beat him, he ran around pulling poor Fox all over the field. Fox cried out, "Never mind, Brer Rabbit, I'll get you." Brer Rabbit said, "Get me now! Get me now!" Rabbit counts Alligator's family. Once upon a time, Rabbit tried to go somewhere when he comes upon a swamp. Rabbit is not able to swim, so he met over there Alligator. Rabbit wants to go across to get something to eat. He say he will get Alligator to take him across. He says to Alligator, "Alligator, you have very few people in your family." Alligator says, "No, you are mistaken. There are 1,000,000 in my family." So Rabbit say, "Call them and I'll count them." Alligator calls them. Rabbit says, "Well, in order to count them, please stand them one by one across the swamp." So Alligator did this and then told Rabbit he should call the rabbits together so he could count them and see which family contained the greatest number. Rabbit say, "I'm gonna count your family first." So Rabbit got all the alligators in a line across the swamp. Then he started to walk across on their backs. He got across to the last alligator. That one bit his tail, and that's why Rabbit has a short tail to this day. Rabbit shamed before ladies. Once upon a time, there was a rabbit and a fox was gone to see a girl to dance that night. Brer Rabbit had borrowed Brer Fox's clothes, and they were dancing with the girls. Brer Fox got jealous of Brer Rabbit and wanted to show him up before the girls. So pretty soon he said, I want. The girls wondered what was the matter and said, "What do you want?" Brer Fox said, "I want my coat." The girls asked, "Who got his coat?" And Brer Fox said, "Brer Rabbit." Pretty soon Brer Fox said, I want. The girls wondered what was the matter and said, "What do you want?" Brer Fox said, "I want my shirt." The girls all said, "Give him his shirt, Brer Rabbit." So Brer Fox keep on saying, I want. So the girls said, "What do you want this time, Brer Fox?" He said, "My trousers." So they told Brer Rabbit to give him his trousers. So Brer Fox kept that up till he got Brer Rabbit naked right in front of his girls. Tar Baby. Brother Rabbit went fishing, and the bear had a house on the lake, and Brother Rabbit went in the bear's house and started tearing up things trying to find something to eat. And when the bear come home, he seen the rabbit tracks. When he seen the rabbit tracks, he made a tar baby. He set it out in the weeds. Brother Rabbit came and spoke to the tar baby. Tar baby said nothing. Brother Rabbit said, "How come you won't speak to me?" Tar baby didn't speak. Brother Rabbit said, "I got a right foot here and will slap you with it if you don't speak to me." The tar baby didn't speak. Brother Rabbit struck at him with his right foot, and it stuck fast. So Brother Rabbit said, "You better turn me loose, or I'll strike you with my left foot. Turn me loose." But the foot stuck to the tar baby, and Brother Rabbit struck him with his left, so the left foot stuck fast. Brother Rabbit said, "If you don't turn my 2 foots loose, I got 2 hind feet back here, and I will kick you with it." So he kicked the tar baby with one of his hind foots. Brother Rabbit said, "Turn my 3 foots loose, you turn 'em loose, 'cause I got another hind foot." But the 3rd foot stuck fast, and so he kicked with the last foot. That stuck. Brother Rabbit said, "If you don't let me loose, I'll butt you with my head." So he butt the tar baby, and his head stuck fast. Then Brother Rabbit said, "Turn me loose, or I'll take my tail and whip you with it." But the tar baby didn't turn him loose, and so Brother Rabbit whipped him with his tail. Just then Bear comes along. He sees Brother Rabbit sticking to the tar baby and says, "I got you now." He started getting some big pieces of wood for to make a fire. Then he put Brother Rabbit in the fire. By this time Brother Rabbit's right foot had done got loose. Bear put more sticks on it. Left foot done got loose. Then the head and the hind foots too. Then the tail. Old Brother Rabbit, he got away. He ran far off, and then he commenced laughing. "Ha ha! He have a big rabbit for dinner, won't he?" Brer Rabbit's Laughing Place. Once upon a time, Brer Rabbit was talking to all his friends. He said he had a laughing place. His friends all said, "Where?" Brer Rabbit said he couldn't take all the people at a time. He'd take one. So they asked him to choose one. So they talked and wanted Brer Fox to go. So Brer Fox didn't want to go right away. He said he'd go later. So about 5 hours before Brer Rabbit was ready the next morning, Brer Fox came round to go. They walked, and Brer Fox got tired and said, "Is this the place?" Brer Rabbit said, "No." Brer Fox said, "I don't feel like going any farther." Brer Rabbit said, "Aw, come on, we're pretty near there." So pretty soon they came to a hornet's nest. Brer Rabbit said to Brer Fox, "Just run through there, then come back, then run through again and come back. I'll show you my laughing place." So he ran through the hornet's nest and all around the briars and bushes. He didn't notice that it was a hornet's nest, so he ran through again, and this time the hornets got him and ran around hollering, squalling, bawling, and kicking. When he came out, he saw Brer Rabbit laughing. Brer Fox said, "What you laughing at?" Brer Rabbit didn't pay him any mind. Brer Fox said, "I thought you were going to show me your laughing place." Brer Rabbit said, "I didn't say I was going to show you our laughing place. I said mine." Are you a man? An old lion lied over on his deathbed. He told his son, "Son, meet everything on earth but man. You'll be all right so long as you meet everything on earth but man." So the son listened to the words of his father for a while. So the older he got, the more ambitious he became. He runs up on Rabbit one day and said to him, "Are you a man?" Rabbit was scared out of his wits and said, "I'm nothing but a poor cottontail. By God, dogs, cats, everything runs me." So Lion ran off. He met a donkey. He run up on Donkey and knocked him down. He said to him, "Are you a man?" Donkey said, "No, I'm not man. Children and everything comes along and knocks me about." So Lion runs up on another Rabbit. He wanted to know from him, was he a man? Rabbit said, "No, I ain't nothing but a rabbit, but I can show you man. You want to see man?" Lion says, "Yes." Rabbit says, "Well, 'bout an hour from now you will see him." So Lion says, "All right." So Rabbit ran off and met a man. He said, "There's a bad animal out here to meet you. He's the king of the world. He wants to see who is man. He is so great." So the man was laying behind a big oak tree. He had a double-barrel rifle. He said to the rabbit, "Now let's see if he is around." Rabbit said, "Yes, he's just around the corner. Don't fail to sting him." So he went and called Lion. The man fired a shot at him and he fell. He got up and the man fired another shot. He fell again. He got up again and the man fired another shot. This time the lion fell and did not get up. He said, "Ah, Rabbit, you're the one who led me to my slaughter. By God, you did me nothing. I promised I'd pay you. It's paying now. Ah, it's a bad thing to be disobedient. If I had listened to my father, I would still be living and happy." End of section 11. Read by Gila Labinger-Freeberg. Napa, April 8th, 2024.
Section 12 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. A Lamba story from Central Africa. Mr. Warthog and Mr. Lion, collected by Clement Doke. One day Mr. Lion went hunting. Where he went he got caught by a string trap that people had set, and there he struggled and struggled, thinking to pull it out. No, he just tired himself out. He suffered. It was then that he became thin and emaciated, and then only mere bones remained. Then one day Mr. Warthog, too, and his children came in single file, and they said, "Let us go and look for food." They came upon Mr. Lion in the trap. He had suffered in it. Then Mr. Lion said, "My dear Mr. Warthog, loosen me, your friend. I'm in trouble. I am dying." Mr. Warthog said, "All right," and he loosened Mr. Lion. Mr. Warthog said, "All right, let us be off, Mr. Lion." Just as they were going away, Mr. Lion turned and looked behind. He saw the young warthogs coming along behind in a line trotting. Mr. Lion said, "Friend Warthog, what a crowd of children are yours! Friend, give me one of your children to eat. See how thin I have got with hunger." Where Mr. Warthog was, he said, "And you would eat a child of mine, and it was I who loosened you to save you." Mr. Lion said, "No, just give me one child of yours. Let me eat." Then where Mrs. Warthog was, she said, "Listen, husband, we have loosened upon ourselves a wild beast. He is asking for a child from us. Let us be weak towards him." Then indeed they were weak towards him, saying, "All right, sir. You will eat of them where we are going. First, sir, let us return to that thing that caught you. Let us see what it is like. Let us look well at it," he said. "Indeed, let us go, my dependents. You shall see what it is like that has tortured me thus and almost killed me." Indeed, they went and reached the string. They said, "But how did it catch you? Where was it?" Then Mr. Lion said, "It was like this. Just take hold of it and bend it down." Indeed, Mr. Warthog and his wife bent it down. They said, "But how did it catch you in this way, sir?" "First, try." Then indeed Mr. Lion put his foot in. Ah, Mr. Warthog let go and caught Mr. Lion. Then the warthogs and their children scattered. Then Mr. Lion said, "Oh, my dear Warthog, are you going? Won't you undo me?" Mr. Warthog and his wife said, "No, and we your friends, we who loosened you, well. And then you begged a child of ours to eat. You are a beast, remain. Now 'tis you yourself who can loosen yourself." There where Mr. Lion remained, he was tortured and tortured by the string, and then he died in it. And so Mr. Warthog never meets Mr. Lion. If they meet, he at once eats Mr. Warthog. End of section 12. Section 13 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Larry Wilson. A House Story from Western Africa. Cayman, Man, and Jackal, retold by Blaise Cendrars. A Cayman who came to look for food in a village heard the people saying, "Tomorrow we will go cayman hunting in the river." Hearing this, he did not want to go back into the water, so finding a rolled-up mat, he crept into it, lay down, and hid himself. Next morning the people went on a cayman hunt. Then they returned home. After they came back, a man left the village to get some wood and dry grass to light a fire and cook his share of the quarry. He saw the cayman, who said to him, "Keep my secret." The man said to the cayman, "Why are you there?" The cayman answered, "I came last night to eat, but I heard the people say they were going to hunt caymans in the morning, so I hid myself and did not return to the water. Take me home back to the river." The man said, "All right." He went away and returned with a sack in which he put the cayman. Then, having sewn up the opening, he took it, carried it to his hut, and set it down. When evening came, he took the sack and went to the water. There he laid it down just on the edge. But the cayman said, "Put me in the water." He took it and carried it into the water, which came just to his knees. The cayman said to him, "Carry me further." And the man went into the water up to his belt. The cayman said again, "Go a little further still. Go in up to your chest." And so the man did. The cayman said, "Put me down here and take me out of the sack." He took him out of the sack, but as soon as he had taken him out, the cayman caught hold of his leg. The man cried, "Ah! What is this?" The cayman answered, "Yes, and what about it?" "Let me go," said the man. "I will not let you go," said the cayman. The man was standing there when some wild animals came to drink. They said, "But that is a man standing there in the water." He said to them, "Yes, I am a man. I did good to a cayman, and he returns me evil." The wild animals said, "You, son of man, it is thus that you treat whoever does you good? You, a cayman, hold fast, never let go of what belongs to you." The man began to weep. The jackal came in his turn to quench his thirst. He saw the man weeping in the water and asked him, "Why are you weeping there in the water?" He answered, "I did good to a cayman, and he repays me with evil." The jackal said, "Cayman, is that true?" He answered, "Yes." The jackal said to them, "Come out, both of you. I am a marabout, and I will judge your case." The cayman replied, "Good. Can anyone disobey the law? No one can." He let go of the man. They came out, approached the jackal, and sat down before him. The jackal said, "Cayman, how did this man act towards you?" "I would have been killed," said the cayman. "He brought me back to my own element. He did good to me, and in return I do him harm." The jackal said, "Cayman, you are right, and this man is wrong." He said to the man, "How did you bring him here?" The man answered, "I put him in this sack to bring him here." The jackal said, "Man, you are lying. How could you have brought him in this sack?" The Cayman said, "He is telling the truth. He is not lying. He really did bring me in the sack." The Jackal said, "Get inside so I can see." The Cayman crawled into the sack, and the Jackal said to the man, "Sew the sack up again so I can see." When the man had sewn the sack up again, the Jackal said to him, "How did you carry him?" "On my head," replied the man. "Stand up," said the Jackal, "and take him on your head so I can see." When the man had put the sack on his head, the Jackal asked him, "Do you eat the flesh of caymans where you live?" "We eat it," he replied. "Then," said the Jackal, "go home and eat what belongs to you." Then the man said to the Jackal, "You have just rendered me a service, and I want to reward you. Come with me to the house, and I will give you 4 fowls." They went off together. When they came to the village, the man said, "Jackal, stay here. I will go to the house and bring you back the fowls." On going home, he found his wife ill in bed, suffering in the stomach, and they told him that nothing but a jackal skin could cure her, and that he must make haste and get one. He said, "Don't make any noise. We have a jackal under our very hand. Where are the children and the dogs? Children, take sticks and go out with the dogs. We will kill the jackal and bring it here." But in the first place the Jackal had felt no confidence, so he did not stay in the place where the man had said, "Wait here while I bring you the fowls." He had left him on the west of the village, and the Jackal had gone to the east, where, full of suspicion, he kept watch on the spot he had quitted, and soon saw it surrounded by dogs and men. At the same time he heard the man saying, "It is here that I left him. Surround the place so that he cannot escape. Hit him and kill him." Meanwhile the Jackal on the eastern side said, "Ah, I know men very well, so I shall run away. You son of man, you are unworthy of trust." That is the end. End of section 13.
Section 14 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Section 14. A Swahili Story from Eastern Africa. The Man Befriended by Luck. Collected by E.C. Baker. A certain wealthy merchant possessed one son whose name was Abdullah, and such was the old man's wealth that Abdullah sought and obtained in marriage Amina, the daughter of the Sultan in whose kingdom he dwelt. But Amina was not content with riches, and said to Abdullah, "If thou art truly a man, thou wilt not be content to live on thy father's wealth, but wilt rather go forth and search for riches on thine own account." Abdullah at first took no notice, but so often did Amina repeat it to him that he became discontented, and said, "So be it. Thou wilt never let me rest until I go forth to earn my own living. Therefore I will go to my father and obtain from him merchandise and camels in order that I may travel and do my business as a merchant." But his wife said, "Not so. We will set out on foot with but a staff in our hands and a little rice in our wallets. Thus shall we be truly independent." Accordingly, they set forth with only a little rice in their wallets and journeyed for many days, until they came to a city. They were hungry and weary, and yet had no money to buy bread. So they entered this city, and the people thereof told them that the eldest son of the Sultan of that land was very sick, and no one knew what manner of sickness it might be. The Sultan had issued a proclamation that anyone who was able to cure his son should receive great wealth, but that if he failed to cure him he should be put to death. Then many wise men came forward to cure the Sultan's son, but so many have been put to death that nowadays there was no one left who dare undertake the matter. Then Amina took Abdullah apart and said, "Go thou and tell the Sultan that thou wilt undertake the cure of his son." But Abdullah gazed at her in astonishment and said, "Woman, thou art mad and seekest to destroy me. I am no physician that I should undertake this cure." Then Amina said, "Mix a preparation of various herbs, and trust to thy luck. If indeed thou failest, thou wilt but die at the hands of the executioner, instead of from hunger, which appears to be our future fate." At last Abdullah consented to do as his wife wished, and they filled a phial with medicine which they concocted of various herbs, the uses of which they themselves did not know. Armed with this, he presented himself at the gates of the palace, and was brought before the sick man, who was so weak that he could scarcely move. Then Abdullah administered the medicine in fear and trembling, and was surprised to find that the patient fell into a deep sleep. The next day the Sultan's son asked for food, which he ate with avidity, and on the following day he was able to walk about. Then the Sultan loaded Abdullah with riches and honors, and presented him with a house in which he dwelt with Amina. But the nobles of the court grew jealous of Abdullah's good fortune, and whispered amongst themselves that he was no wise man, and that his cure of the prince was merely due to luck. This rumor finally reached the ears of the Sultan, and he, wishing to find out whether this really was the case, took a fly which he placed in a bottle. This bottle he wrapped in a cloth and locked in a box, which he placed in the audience chamber. Then he sent his messengers to fetch Abdullah, for he said, "If this Abdullah is truly a wise man, he will have no difficulty in telling me what is inside the bottle." When Abdullah heard what was required of him, he was stricken with terror, and would have fled from that town. But Amina rallied him, and said, "Trust once more in thy luck. Go into the presence of the Sultan, and use thy wits to escape from this dilemma." So Abdullah went with the messengers, and came into the presence of the Sultan, and saw the box upon the table. As he entered, a fly settled on his forehead, and bit him, and Abdullah, striking his forehead, exclaimed, "A fly!" Then the Sultan and those present, thinking that he referred to the contents of the box, wondered greatly, and said, "This is truly a wise man." The Sultan loaded Abdullah with yet more riches, and asked his advice on all matters of importance. After a time it happened that the ruler of a neighboring kingdom made war upon the Sultan, and the Sultan, wishing to place himself at the head of his troops, sent a letter to Abdullah asking him when he would die. Then Abdullah was wrathful, and said to his wife Amina, "Thou hast brought this upon me, and thou desirest my destruction in order that thou mayest sleep with the Sultan. Now therefore I will go to the Sultan, and I will kill him, that thou mayest not obtain thy desire." He went forth filled with anger, and when he arrived at the palace he found the Sultan surrounded by his wazirs and nobles. He ran forward and seized the Sultan by the arm, and dragged him forth the courtyard, that he might kill him. But no sooner had they reached the courtyard than the roof of that room fell in and killed all that were within. Abdullah said, "But for me thou wouldest now be dead," and the Sultan was filled with gratitude, and heaped yet further favors upon Abdullah. The inhabitants of a neighboring village sent a deputation to the Sultan, complaining of a fierce lion which nightly entered their village, destroying their herds and devouring their children. When the Sultan heard of this, he sent messengers to Abdullah, ordering him to destroy the lion. Abdullah, when he received this message, went into his wife's apartments and called her vile names, saying, "In truth the Sultan seeks my destruction, that he may enjoy thee." But Amina said, "What thou sayest is not true. Nevertheless, thou must destroy this lion, else we are undone." Abdullah said, "So be it. Since it appears that I must die in any case, I will go forth and meet this lion, and when I am dead thou mayest satisfy thy unlawful love for the Sultan." So Abdullah went forth and traveled into the village which the lion harried, and went out into the open country, very much afraid, and starting at every sound. When night came on, he climbed a tree and slept in the branches. Next morning, when he awoke, he looked down and saw the lion sleeping at the foot of the tree. Then he became half dead with fear, and he was unable to hold his water, which fell upon the lion and woke him up, and the lion stood beneath the tree, growling and showing his teeth. Then Abdullah, in his terror, trembled so that he lost his balance and fell upon the lion's back, and there he clung, gripping the neck of the lion with his hands, and biting its flesh with his teeth in order to prevent himself from slipping off. The lion, terrified at this burden, and in pain from the bites which Abdullah inflicted on him, rushed off in the direction of the town. He ran through the town and scattered the people right and left. He came to the palace with Abdullah still clinging to his back, and entered the presence of the Sultan and his court. The Sultan and his wazirs and nobles fled panic-stricken, and hid themselves. Then Abdullah, slipping from the lion's back, ran out of the room and quickly bolted the door. The Sultan and his nobles came forth from their hiding places and said, "What manner of man is this, who rides lions as other men ride camels?" So they loaded Abdullah with riches and held feasts in his honor. But Abdullah said to Amina, "Go thou to the Sultan, if such be thy desire. As for me, I will return to my father's house, and will no more trust in my luck." And Amina said, "Indeed, thou wrongest me. I love only thee, and would return with thee." So Abdullah took the wealth which he had gained, and returned with Amina to his father's house. The story is finished. End of section 14. Read by Lisa.
Section 15 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A story from Morocco. The Fatal House, retold by Edward Powys Mathers. There was, and there was, and Allah was in every place. No land, no region is empty of him. And there was basil and lilies in the lap of the prophet, upon whom be the benediction and the peace of God. And there was once a man who had 2 wives, each of whom had given him 7 daughters. 14 daughters, not 1 son. That is an exceptional misfortune. The father had a marked preference for one of his wives, but she was very evil, and had no thought but to rid herself of the daughters of her rival. Now there was a fatal house in that city, haunted by the jinn. We died if we passed the night there. So, having heard of this house, the bad woman persuaded her husband to hire it, and to send the 7 daughters of the spurned wife to sleep there one evening. This was done. But these girls were very cunning, as well as being exceedingly virtuous, courageous, and well brought up. They were not disturbed by what they thought was going to happen, but only requested their miserable father to buy them brooms and fishes, milk, and perfumes. The house was very dirty, and full of the dry carcasses of men who had perished there. But the 7 sisters courageously swept the whole place, and cast milk upon the floor to appease the jinn, who were very partial to this drink, and burned the perfumes for the same purpose. And during this time one of them lit a fire and began to grill the fish for supper. But suddenly a hand without either arms or body appeared, stretching out to her, while a voice said in gentle, supplicating accents, "My sister, give me a fish to eat." "With pleasure and good heart, dear friend," answered the cooking girl, without showing any sign of disturbance. "This one is still too hot. It would hurt you. I will cool it." As soon as the fish had become cool enough, she stretched it out to the hand, and did the same for 7 other hands, which came, one after the other, to beg for grilled fish. Then, as night had fallen, the 7 sisters lit candles, and set themselves to table and ate. Then a genie with 2 noses presented himself, having a candle in his hand. But instead of being frightened, they welcomed him in friendly fashion, and made him sit beside them, and offered him very sweet tea with mint. "Do you require a being with 3 noses?" cried another genie, suddenly appearing. "Certainly," they answered, with heart most friendly, and in duty bound. And thereafter successively appeared a genie with 4, a genie with 5, a genie with 6, and a genie with 7 noses, who were all received most kindly by the sisters. Then the voice of a little child was heard, weeping, moaning, and saying, "Oh, my sister, fetch me down, fetch me down." The bravest of all took a candle, and mounted the staircase leading to the terrace. On the top step lay a great slab of meat, and it was this which was making all the noise. So she took it tenderly in her robe and carried it downstairs. The jinn were affected by their welcome from the 7 sisters, and therefore, instead of doing them harm, thanked them for having fed and scented them, for having washed the house, and for having kept them company. Next day at dawn, the father came to the fatal house with 14 bearers, provided with 7 planks, to carry away the corpses of his daughters. But instead of finding them dead, he He saw them joyous and in excellent health, and covered with jewels which the grateful Jinn had given them. Therefore he was compelled to dismiss the bearers and to take the young girls home with him. Who was disappointed? It was the wicked, jealous wife. Seeing the gifts with which her stepdaughters had been loaded, she wished the same for her daughters, and accused her husband of being very clumsy. At length, at her insistence, he led his 7 other daughters to the haunted house, and left them there alone. They had asked for fishes and victuals as the others had, but as they were negligent and dirty, they had not thought for either brooms or perfumes. Without tidying at all, they began to prepare their meal, and at once a hand showed itself before the one who was grilling and begged for a fish. "What horror!" cried the girl, and began to recite the formula of exorcism. "In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, I seek near God a refuge against Satan, the stoned one." And she cried to her sisters, "Give me an axe." But the menaced hand disappeared with no words spoken. When the Jinn with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 noses came to ask to share their repast, instead of receiving them cordially as the other sisters had done, these sisters refused them company, and not without heaping curses and mockeries upon them. When the voice of the child cried from the terrace, "Fetch me down," not one of them went to the help of the enchanted meat, but each one cried, "God damn you." When the father arrived next morning at dawn, this time without either bearers or planks, he found 7 corpses in the fatal house. He repented bitterly of his fault, and ceased to love the wicked woman who had caused this calamity through her evil intention with regard to her stepdaughters, for an evil intention is everything. End of section 15, read by Laura Gibbs.
Section 16 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Brenda McCracken. A Pashtun story from South Asia. How the Greedy Princess Was Tricked. Collected by Lucas White King. It is said that a certain person traveled in pursuit of his trade from one part of India to another, and by trade and by barter had gathered together 700 rupees. On his way home, he happened to pass through a certain city, where he put up for the night near the palace of a princess famed for her matchless beauty. The traveler was very desirous of seeing her, and loitered in the city for that purpose. He made the acquaintance of an attendant of the princess, to whom he disclosed his longing. The attendant told him that the princess would show a finger for 100 rupees, and he consented to the terms. The princess showed 5 fingers of one hand and 2 fingers of the other, and took from the traveler all the money he had gathered with so much suffering and difficulty. After the traveler had lost his 700 rupees, he repented of what he had done and lamented the past before he went to sleep. In the morning, a certain man, seeing his grievous state, asked him the reason of his sorrow, took pity on him, and gave him a plot of land. He advised him to sow melons in it, and when they became ripe, to give them away in the name of Ramzada Thag, the thief. The traveler did as he was advised, and when nearly all the melons had been distributed, Ramzada Thag appeared and asked the traveler what he could do for him. The traveler told what had befallen him, and the Thag took him towards the royal palace. On the way, they met a shepherd, from whom they bought a lamb for 1 rupee. When they reached the palace, they began to kill the lamb with the wrong side of the knife. The lamb complained loudly, and so did Thag and the traveler. The princess, who saw all of this from the palace, ordered her attendant to kill the lamb for them, as they both seemed to be idiots. The attendant obeyed the order and returned. The pair then began to take off the lamb's skin, the thog pulling one way and the traveler the other, and again they disputed noisily. A second time the princess sent her attendant, who did for them what they could not do themselves, and returned. Then they lighted a fire and put a cooking pot on it upside down, with large pieces of meat on the top. Then they complained noisily that the meat would not cook. A third time the attendant came and cooked the meat for them. Next they started trying to break the cooking pot in order to get out the cooked meat. The attendant, who was still there, took the meat out, put it in a bowl, and gave it to them to eat. They then said that they never ate their food from their own hands, but were accustomed to eat from the hands of their wives. That night they were on a journey. If any woman would come and give them their food, well and good. Otherwise, they must lie down hungry. The princess's heart softened for these idiots, and she called her attendant and ordered her to bring them and all their belongings into the royal palace. They were brought in, and the princess fed one, and her attendant the other. As they were without bedclothes, and the season was wintry, the princess invited them to sleep in a corner of the palace. Again they began to make a disturbance, and the princess thought that if their voices reached the sultan's ears, he would certainly order them to be killed. She asked them why they were making such a noise, and they replied that they were accustomed to lying on warm beds, and on account of the cold could not sleep. The princess, therefore, gave part of her bed to the one, and her attendant part to the other. After a while, the thog got up and said he was going to cry the bang, a call for prayer. The attendant begged him not to do so, but he replied that if he were not allowed to call out his bang, he would have to give away 1,000 rupees for his failure. The princess was therefore obliged to give him that sum, and then drove them out. The thog gave 700 rupees to the traveler, and took 300 for himself. The story ends. End of section 16. Section 17 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Brenda McCracken. A Buddhist Story from India. The Grateful Animals. Retold by Marguerite Aspinwall. Once on a time, when Brahmadatta was king of Benares, he had a son who went by the name of Prince Wicked. He was fierce and cruel, speaking to everyone about him with abuse and blows, terrifying the folk within and without the palace until they came to dread him as if he had been a veritable ogre. One day, wishing to swim in the river that ran hard by the palace, he took with him his retinue of courtiers and servants and went down to the bank. At the same time, the air began to grow dark, and a great storm came up. But the prince insisted upon going into the river just the same. "Hi there!" he cried to his servants. "Take me out to midstream, bathe me there, and bring me back again." So they took him out to midstream, although the waves were beating higher along the river, and the darkness of night had come down and covered the country about them. However, when they had carried the prince out to the middle of the river, the servants took counsel together, saying, "What will he do to us when he is king? Let us kill the wicked wretch now while we have the opportunity, and go back and tell his father that he drowned in the storm." Then, giving the prince a push, all together, they cried out to him above the noise of the wind and the rain, "In you go, pest!" and flung him into the water. When they had made their way ashore, they went up to the palace, and being asked where the prince was, replied, We have missed him somehow in the darkness. Finding the storm come on suddenly, he must have gone home ahead of us." The courtiers then went into the king's presence and replied to his questions as to the whereabouts of his son by saying the same thing. When a search of the palace failed to reveal the prince, the king, greatly alarmed, ordered the gates to be thrown open, and through them he and all his courtiers marched down to the river side. Here they commenced to search for the missing prince with great diligence. But no trace of the king's wicked son could be found, for in the darkness of the storm he had been swept away by the current in the river. He had not been carried far when he was washed up against a huge tree trunk, also floating on the angry surface of the water. Getting a firm hold on the branches, the prince managed to climb up on the broad trunk, and so was swept on downstream, crying aloud from time to time, in great fear of a speedy death by drowning. For some years before, a wealthy guildmaster in Benares had buried 40 crores of treasure in the bank of the river, close by a hole in which lived a big snake. About the same time, another man in the city had also chosen the river bank at the same spot to bury 30 crores of treasure in, under a hole in which lived an old, wise water rat. Still later, both men had died without recovering their buried wealth, and no one remained who knew of its existence, except only the snake and the rat. In the storm which swept Prince Wicked down the river, the rising water had rushed into the holes of the snake and the rat, so the two creatures struggled out through the same way the water was coming in. Being swept out into the current, they were washed up, by chance, against the very tree trunk to which the prince was clinging. The snake climbed up at one end, and the rat at the other, and both got a foothold with the prince on the trunk. As the trunk floated down the river, a silk cotton tree, in which lived a young parrot, was uprooted by the swollen waters and fell, shaking the parrot out of its branches onto the self-same trunk on which crouched the snake, the prince, and the rat. So now there were these 4 floating downstream together upon the tree. On the shore, close by a bend in the river which the tree was now approaching, a certain wise and holy hermit had built himself a hermitage. And that night, as he was pacing to and fro, meditating on holy things, he heard the loud cries of the prince drifting down the river, and thought to himself, "This fellow creature must not perish before the eyes of so merciful and compassionate a hermit as I am. I will go and rescue him from the water." Leaving his warm, safe hermitage, he went down to the bank, shouting aloud cheerily, "Be not afraid, be not afraid," and plunging into the stream, swam out to the floating tree trunk and seized hold on one of the branches. Being as strong as an elephant, the hermit was able to draw the whole tree and its cargo of living creatures ashore with one long pull, and set the prince safe and sound upon the shore. Then, becoming aware of the snake, the rat, and the parrot, also on the tree, he carried them up to his hermitage, and lighting a fire there, warmed the animals first, since they were the weaker, and afterward the prince. As soon as they were comfortable, the hermit brought various kinds of fruit and set them before his guests, feeding the animals first, and the prince afterwards. This enraged the young prince, who was used to being flattered and treated with great deference in his father's palace, and he said to himself, "This rascally hermit pays no respect to my royal birth, but actually gives brute beasts precedence over me." And he hated the hermit. A few days later, when all 4 had recovered their strength and the waters had subsided, the snake bade farewell to the hermit with these words, "Father, you have done me a great service. I am not poor, for I have 40 crores of gold hidden at a certain spot. Should you ever want money, all my hoard shall be yours. You have only come to this spot and call Snake." Next, the rat took his leave with a like promise to the hermit as to his treasure, bidding him come and call out, "Rat." Then the parrot bade him farewell also, saying, "Father, silver and gold have I none, but should you ever want for choice rice, come to where I dwell and call out, 'Parrot,' and I, with the aid of my kinsfolk, will give you many wagon loads of rice." Last of all came the prince. His heart was filled with base ingratitude and with a determination to put his benefactor to death if the hermit should come to visit him. But concealing his real feelings, he said, "Come, father, to me when I am king, and I will bestow on you the 4 requisites." So saying, he took his departure, and returning home, he not long after succeeded to his father's throne. Some time afterward, the desire came to the hermit to put all their professions to the test. And first of all he went to the snake, and standing near its hole, cried out as the creature had bidden him, "Snake!" At the word, the snake darted forth, and with every mark of respect said, "Father, in this place there are 40 crores in gold. Dig them up and take them all." "It is well," returned the hermit. "When I need them, I will not forget." Then bidding the snake adieu, he went on to where the rat lived, and called out, "Rat!" And the rat did as the snake had done, offering all his 30 crores of treasure. Going next to the parrot, and calling him by name, the bird at once flew down at his call from the tree top, and respectfully asked whether it was the hermit's wish that he, with the aid of his kinsfolk, should gather paddy for him from the region round the Himalayas. The holy man dismissed the parrot also, with the promise that, if need arose, he would not forget the bird's offer. Last of all, being minded to test the wicked prince, who was now king, in his father's place, the hermit came to the royal pleasure ground, and on the day after his arrival made his way, carefully dressed, into the city on his rounds for alms. Just at that moment, the ungrateful king, seated in all his royal splendor on his elephant of state, was passing in a great procession around the city. Seeing the hermit from afar, he thought to himself, "Here's that rascally hermit come to quarter himself and his appetite on me. I must have his head off before he can publish to the world the service he rendered me." With this intention, he signed to his attendants, and when they drew near to ask his pleasure, he said to them, "Methinks yonder rascally hermit is here to beg from me. See that this creature of ill omen does not look upon me, but seize and bind him, flog him at every street corner, and then march him out of the city, chop off his head at the place of execution, and impale his body on a stake." Obeying the king's commands, the attendants bound the innocent hermit, whose only crime had been saving the wicked monarch's life, and flogged him at every street corner on the way to the place of execution. But all their flogging failed to move the hermit, or to make him cry out. All he did was repeat these lines, "In some men gratitude you fail to find, while animals are grateful, true, and kind." These he continued to repeat whenever he was flogged, till at last the wise among the bystanders asked the hermit what service he had rendered to the king. Then the hermit told the whole story, ending with the words, "So it comes to pass that by rescuing him from the torrent, I brought all this woe upon myself. And when I reflect upon this, I exclaim, as ye have heard." Filled with indignation at this tale of injustice, the nobles, the Brahmins, and all classes with one accord cried out, "This ungrateful king does not recognize even the goodness of this holy man who saved his majesty's life. How can we have any profit from such a king? Seize the tyrant." In their anger, they rushed upon the king from every side and slew him there and then, as he rode on his elephant, with arrows and javelins and stones and clubs and any other weapons that came to hand. The corpse they dragged by the heels to a ditch and flung it in. And they anointed the hermit king and set him to rule over them. He ruled over them well and justly, but one day as he was thinking on the past, the desire came to him again to try the rat and the snake and the parrot. So calling together his followers, he set forth from the city with a great retinue and came to where the snake dwelt. At the first call of "Snake," out came the snake from his hole, and with every mark of respect said, "Here, my lord, is your treasure. Take it." Then the king delivered the 40 crores of gold to his attendants, and proceeding to the rat's hole, called, "Rat." Out came the rat, and saluting the king, gladly gave up his 30 crores. Placing this treasure, too, in the hands of his followers, the king continued on to the tree in which lived the parrot. And in like manner, the bird came, and bowing down at the king's feet, asked whether he should collect rice for his majesty. "We will not trouble," the king told him, "till rice is needed. Now let us be going." So with 70 crores of gold, and with the rat, the snake, and the parrot as well, the king journeyed back to the city. Here in his palace, he caused the treasure to be lodged in a strong room and guarded for him. And he had a golden tube constructed for the grateful snake to dwell in, a crystal casket to house the rat, and a cage of pure gold for the parrot. Every day, too, by the king's command, food was served to these 3 creatures in vessels of gold: sweet parched corn for the parrot and snake, and scented rice for the rat. And the king did many good and charitable works in the land, and he and the rat, the snake, and the parrot lived in good will and harmony, one with another, to their lives' end. End of section 17.
Section 18 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Lepcha fairy tale from South Asia. A fairy disguised as a puppy. Collected by Cheridah de Beauvoir Stocks. Once upon a time, there was an orphan boy who had nothing to eat but the fish he caught. One day he happened to catch a very big fish, and as he was dividing it up in his mind's eye into equal portions for several days, it spoke. "Don't kill me," it entreated him. "Come with me to my father and mother instead." The orphan boy said, "But how can I go with you into the water?" The fish told him he would have to hold on to his tail very tightly, and jumped with him into the river, swimming until they came to his father and mother, who were sitting on golden and silver thrones. The fish explained he had been caught, but the orphan boy had been merciful. The father and mother fish told the orphan boy that they were happy and grateful, and would give him as a recompense anything he desired. The orphan boy noticed a wee puppy lying in a corner of the hearth, and asked them to give him this. He brought it back to his cottage and tied it up in a corner. As usual, he went out every day, but when he came back every evening, he found everything was ready for him, His food was always cooked and waiting for him, though he never knew who worked. One day he hid himself in a corner to see who would come in. He saw a beautiful girl, who appeared when the dog took off its skin. She was made of gold from her head downwards, and from her waist downwards she was made of silver. She started to cook, but the orphan boy came out from his hiding place, took hold of the puppy's skin, and, tearing it to pieces, scattered it everywhere. Gold and silver flowers sprang up where it fell. But the girl said, "Alas, my time has not yet come." But the orphan boy would not listen to her entreaties, and from that day they lived together in that cottage. One day the king of that country saw the beautiful girl, and, taking a great fancy to her, he desired her for his own. "Alas," cried the girl once more to the boy, "if you had only listened to me and waited, now much trouble will fall on us." The king said to the orphan boy, "Let us have a cockfight, and whoever wins shall gain your wife." When the orphan boy heard this, he wept, and said to the girl, "I am but a poor man, and haven't a bird fit to fight the king's cock." But she said, "Do not worry, but go to my father and mother's place in the river, and ask them to give you the medium-sized cock." So the orphan boy went to the girl's parents in the river, and returned with the medium-sized cock. The next morning at sunrise the cocks were let loose on the playing ground, and when they fought, it so happened the king's cock was killed. "This time," he said, "you have won. Now, tomorrow, we will have a bullfight." When the orphan boy returned home, he wept again, saying to his wife, "But where can I get a bull?" But she told him to go to her parents and ask for the medium-sized bull. He went down to the stream, swam, and came back with the bull. The next morning at sunrise, the bulls started fighting, and the king's bull was slain. The king became very angry at both his cock and his bull being killed, and said that for the third time they would fight themselves with armies. This time the orphan boy wept louder than ever, as he was all by himself and had no army. But the beautiful girl told him to go once more to her parents, asking for the medium-sized box. He received it, and on the next morning, as he saw the king coming towards him at sunrise with a big army, he opened the box. Lightning flashed out of it, killing the king with all his men. Then the orphan boy became king in his place, and lived happily with the beautiful girl ever after. End of section 18. Read by Laura Gibbs.
Section 19 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Folk Tale from East Asia. Moko and the 12 Little Earthmen. Retold by Charles H. Meeker. Moko lived with his widowed aunt in a small hut on the side of a mountain that sloped toward a wide valley. His aunt was very poor and had to work hard in the rice fields to support herself and her little nephew. One time the good woman became ill and was not able to work for several months. When their food was gone, she called Moko and told him to take a basket and go into the newly harvested fields to see if he could find a little rice that the harvesters had left. The little boy took the basket and went into the fields, but the gleaners had been there before him and gathered every head of the grain. He started home feeling very sad, for he and his aunt had had but little to eat for a long time. When he was nearly home, he noticed something white in the stubble in front of him. As he came near the object, he found that it was a beautiful white heron. The bird did not try to fly, so Moko walked to it, gently picked it up and placed it in his basket. At first, Moko was very happy, because he thought that he would take the bird home and have his aunt cook it for their supper. He soon began to pity the bird, though, for he saw that its wing was broken. As he was walking along with the bird under his arm, he suddenly heard a cry that seemed to come from the ground near his feet. "Pull me out! Pull me out!" said a squeaky little voice. Moko set his basket down and tried to find the place from which the voice came. Parting the grass carefully, he soon saw the owner of the voice, a little earthman, up to his middle in the mud. Moko pulled the little fellow out and set him in a dry place. "Pull me out! Pull me out!" squeaked a second voice. Moko again looked in the grass and found another earthman stuck in the mud as the first was. He pulled him out and stood him up by the other. "Pull me out! Pull me out!" came a third voice. Moko pulled the third one out, but had scarcely done so when he heard more calls. One by one he drew the little fellows from the mud until he had pulled out 12 little earthmen. "Thank you for saving our lives," said the earthmen all together. "It was a great big fellow with a great big foot who trod on us this afternoon, and when we begged him to pull us out of the mud, he only laughed and passed on. But he'll be sorry. He'll be sorry," said all the little fellows as they disappeared in the stubble. When Moko reached home, he told his aunt everything that had happened. "But," he said sorrowfully, "let's not kill the poor bird. Its wing is broken, and it looks so gentle and sad. Perhaps we can find something else to eat tomorrow." "You are very kind," said his aunt. "Take the heron and put it into the box in the corner of the room. When its wing is well, you may take it out into the fields again." Moko placed the bird in the box and went to bed. Early next morning he ran to the box to see how his bird was. He raised the lid lightly, and what do you think he found? The box was full of clean white rice, and the heron was sitting contentedly upon the grain. Moko and his aunt were now very happy. The good woman put some of the rice into a pot to cook. She then filled a bag with the grain and sent Moko to the market, where he sold it. He bought some meat and fruit with the money. Every night the heron was placed in the box, and every morning the box was full of rice. A few weeks later, Moko and his aunt rented a stall in the market of the town near their home to sell the rice. As the rice was of a fine quality, they had no trouble in selling all they could spare. By the end of the year, they had saved enough money to buy a small house in the town into which they moved. Now Moko had a wicked old uncle whose name was Boonog. One night, Boonog came to his relatives' home and asked them where they were getting so much rice to sell. At first they would not tell him. Then the wicked man became angry and said that they were stealing the rice and that he would have them thrown into jail. Fearing that he would have to go to prison, Moko told his uncle about the bird. "Let me see your rice-laying heron," Boonog demanded. When shown the bird, he picked it up with the box and took it home with him. Before going to bed, Boonog went to the box where the bird was kept and said, "Now lay rice for me as you have done for those poor relatives of mine, or else in the morning I shall chop off your head." Early in the morning, Boonog went to the box, expecting to find it full of rice, but instead it was full of small white stones. He at once seized the heron and cut off its head. He then threw the dead bird out of the window. A short time afterward, Moko came to the home of his uncle and found the dead heron lying in the yard. He picked it up tenderly and carried it home. In the ground just beneath his window he dug a hole. Here he buried the heron and stuck a sprig of an orange tree into the mound over the grave. Next morning, when Moko looked out of the window, he saw a beautiful tree growing upon the grave, and around the tree were dancing the 12 little earthmen whom he had pulled from the mud. They were dressed in green suits with golden sashes and gold helmets. When they saw Moko, they smiled, took off their helmets to him, and disappeared in the grass. The little boy jumped out of bed as quickly as he could and ran downstairs to look at the tree. Far up near the top, he saw growing a big golden orange. He picked it and ran with it to his aunt. "This is indeed very strange," exclaimed the woman in great surprise. She examined the orange closely, but not being able to believe her own eyes, she took it to a goldsmith, who said it was the purest of gold and bought it at a great price. Every morning the tree bore a golden orange, so the woman and her little nephew soon became rich. They had their old house torn down and a fine new home built in its place. When Moko and his aunt moved into their new house, the cruel uncle came a second time and demanded to know where they had gotten so much money. "This time I know you are stealing," he said, "and that you lied in the first place. Tell me the whole truth, or I shall have you arrested." The woman and the boy were greatly frightened, so they told Bunag about the gold-bearing orange. "Show me the tree," he demanded. Moko pointed out the tree, and upon it were 12 large golden oranges, for they had not been gathered for 12 days. The greedy man tore the beautiful shining oranges from the branches and hurried home with them. It was late in the evening, so he hid them in the box where he had kept the heron. Before going to bed, he was careful to fasten the lid with a padlock. Bunag could not sleep for thinking about the golden oranges. Early in the morning, he lighted a candle and went to open the box. As it was still dark, he had to place his face very near the lock in order to see the keyhole. When he unlocked the box, he peeped over the lid, but he had no sooner done so than out sprang the 12 little earthmen. They all caught him around the neck so tightly with their strong little arms that the big fellow tumbled as if dead. "He'll be sorry, he'll be sorry," said the little men. "He not only trampled us into the mud with his big foot, but robbed the kind little boy and the poor widow." While Bunag lay upon the floor, one of the earthmen took him by his nose and stretched it out till it was a yard long. One took him by the big toes, pulling them out as long as his nose. They pulled out his ears until they looked like donkey's ears. They then pulled him up by his fingers. As they did so, his fingers stretched out until they were almost as long as his big toes. Bunag scrambled to his feet and tried to catch the earthmen. But the 12 little fellows had had enough fun, so they hopped out of the window and were never seen again. Bunag then poked around in the box with his long fingers, trying to find the gold. But he found nothing but a lot of sticky mud from the rice field. When the wicked fellow's wife and children got up in the morning and saw this strange-looking man, they ran screaming to the street. Their cries attracted all the neighbors, who came as fast as they could to see what was the matter. When they saw Bunag with his long nose, his donkey ears, and his long fingers, they ran home to bar their windows and doors. Indeed, such a sight was enough to frighten anyone. In a week or two, all the women of the town called upon the mayor to ask him to put the terrible-looking man away where he could not be seen. The mayor looked wise, but said that he could not do anything. The women then took things in their own hands. One evening, they came with sticks and chased the ugly man into the forest. After seeking in vain for a whole year for some human being to be his friend, Bunag at last tried to make friends with the hogs, but even they would have nothing to do with him. At the first sight of him, they scampered into the brush as fast as their legs could take them. The wife and children of Bunog would have starved to death had it not been for the kindness of Moko, who took care of them. Moko even furnished food for his uncle by placing it upon a stump at the edge of the forest where Bunog could come at night to get it. Bunog had been so badly punished for his meanness that after a few years, when his face straightened out and his fingers and toes grew short again, he came back to his family and lived a kinder life ever after. End of section 19. Read by Gila Labinger-Freeberg, Napa, April 9th, 2024.
Section 20 of Tales of 1927. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A folktale from Japan, The Weaver of the Frost, retold by Ken Nakazawa. There was great sorrow among the weavers of the moon halo, because Princess Mia, the chief weaver, was about to be banished from Moonland. Princess Mia was the most beautiful and most beloved of all the weavers, and therefore this disgrace of hers meant as much sorrow to her friends as it did to the princess herself. Moreover, the punishment had come in such a way that anyone with an understanding heart could not help sympathizing with her. You too would feel sorry for her if you knew how she had come to break the king's law. It had happened in this way. One night the princess was trying out her pet rabbit on the sea. Rabbits are the horses in Moonland. As we all know, they are such swift runners that they can go upon the sea without sinking. You have seen them many times hopping from wave-top to wave-top, though perhaps you might have thought they were the whitecaps of the waves. One night the princess was riding on this rabbit when she caught sight of some green insects which were watching the moon from the shore. They looked somewhat like grasshoppers, but were smaller in body, longer of wing, and 1,000 times more beautiful. "We are the spinners of insect land," said they when the princess had asked who they were. "We gather threads from the heart of the grass and give them to the makers of webs and cocoons." The princess became very much interested, because she too had spinners like these in her Moonland. She stepped down from her rabbit and had a long talk with them. She asked them how they gathered the thread and how this thread was made into cocoons, and in turn she told them about the spinners and the golden loom of Moonland. "Perhaps some of you have heard about this golden loom of Moonland," she said. "It is a beautiful thing. It stands higher than the tallest tree on earth, and is so wide that it will take you one whole day to walk from one end of it to the other. True to its name, it is made of solid gold, and is decorated with all kinds of carvings and jewels. The weavers are very proud of their loom, and always keep it clean and well polished, so that when sunlight falls upon it, it brightens all Moonland." This story of the golden loom, and the insects which collect thread for it, made the spinners so curious that they wanted to go and see Moonland. Some of them, however, were old enough to know that they were too humble creatures to ask such a favor, and some were afraid to go up so high in the sky. But Ispot, the most beloved son of Insectland, whose wings were like young bamboo leaves, and whose ruby eyes were flecked with moonbeams, was too young to be very thoughtful, and too brave to be afraid. When the princess was about to leave, he hid himself in one of her sleeves, and was carried by her to Moonland. That was the beginning of the trouble. There is a law in Moonland which forbids any outsider to enter its gates without special permission from the king, and anyone who breaks this law is sent to prison for life. Naturally, when the princess discovered Ispot in her sleeve, she was terrified. If she had been less kind-hearted, she might have been angry and taken Ispot straight to the court. But as she was as kind as the kindest mother you ever knew, and could not think of sending him to prison, there to stay for the rest of his life, After long thinking, she decided that she would send him back to his people. So she kept him hidden in the corner of her sleeve, and then one night, when no one was looking, she sent him down by a long thread. This was the act for which she must now be banished from her home. And knowing it, her friends were all full of sympathy. They gathered around the golden loom and asked one another if there was no way to save her from the disgrace. In the meantime, the gates of the king's palace were opened, and the princess came out, guarded by a few officials who seemed to be as sad as the princess. The weavers ran to her and asked her what she was going to do on the earth, and if there was any hope of her ever coming back to Moonland. "I'm going down to weave frost for the woman of the north," she said. "My task begins at the fall of leaves and ends at the coming of snow. I do not know whether I shall ever be permitted to come back, but the king said that if I neglected my task even for a single day, I should lose my right to be pardoned. That means, if I do my work well, I may yet be allowed to return. I am very sorry that I must part from you. I hope you will be very kind to one another, and think of me once in a while." And then she climbed down the ladder of moonbeams, and came to the earth. On the earth she was received by the spinners of Insect-land, who were sorry that one of them had caused her so much trouble, and were anxious to know if there was anything they could do for her. As for Ispot himself, his heart was torn with pity and remorse. "Please tell me," he cried, "is there anything I can do to help you? I would die 1,000 times to make amends for what I have done." Of course, there was nothing they could do for her. They were small and powerless. "Thank you, little friends," replied the princess. "I do not think there is anything you can do for me. You can help me best by being kind to one another. Do not be too hard on Ispot, for he has suffered enough." And she left them for the home of the woman of the north. The woman of the north was uglier than the ugliest woman you can think of. She was lean and humpbacked, and had a head like a worn floor mop. Her long beak nose was crooked and pockmarked, and a long cracked eye-tooth hung down from her quivering gray lips. Her black-rimmed eyes were so deeply sunk and so narrow that no one could look into them, and her speech was like the jabbering of a woodchuck. Her clothes were like a discarded coal-sack, and she lived in a squalid old cave, treading upon the pedals of a squeaking spinning-wheel. Oh yes, she was a horrible-looking creature. But her heart was even uglier and meaner than her face. She growled and spluttered when the princess asked for yarns, because it meant more work for her. "You speak as if I hadn't enough to do," she grumbled. "Don't sit down. That cushion isn't for you." She hobbled to her closet, pulled out a few bundles of tangled, dirty yarns, and flung them at the princess. "Take this and go, and no talk." The princess examined the thread. There were enough yarns to last only 13 days, while she must weave frost for 15 days. The princess asked the woman to give her some more. "No talk, I said," roared the woman. "Go, you fussy little fool." "But this will last only 13 days. Don't you think you should give me some more?" "That's enough. Now get out, or I will take the thread away from you." She hobbled back to her wheel and began to pedal. "You are very unkind," said the princess. "If I ever go back to Moonland, I will tell the king how you treated me." "Yes," she jeered, showing her purple gums, "if you ever go back. But you will never go back, because you can't make 15 days' frost out of this thread. And if you can't, you will lose the right to be pardoned. Ha, ha, ha! If I ever go back." The princess carried the yarns to the loom, which was made of wood, and was so old and warped that it seemed hardly usable. She untangled the thread, washed it clean, and wove it into frost, using as little thread as she could. Because she had used so little thread, the frost was pitifully thin, and melted almost before sunrise. This made the princess very unhappy, and hiding herself in the woods, she cried all of the day. For 10 nights thereafter the princess worked, weaving frost and spreading it over the field. Then, counting the remaining yarns, she discovered that she had enough for only 4 more days. In horror, she ran to the woman of the north and asked for 1 more day's supply of yarn. The woman was meaner than ever. "If you haven't any thread for the 15th day," she said, "you just sit down and take a rest." "But I can't. I must have frost for every one of the 15 days, because if I miss even a single morning, I shall never be forgiven and must stay here forever." "That's good. Miss it then, and we shall have fine times together. Out with you." She drove her out with her crooked staff. Discouraged, the princess stumbled back to her loom and began to cry. Suddenly she heard someone calling her. "Princess, princess, what is the trouble? Can't we do something? Can't we help?" It was Ispot. "I thought I would come and see you once more before I go to my winter sleep," he said, shaking the dust from his wings. "You seem to be in great trouble. I should like very much to know if there is anything I can do." The princess thought for a moment. Suddenly she clapped her hands. "Yes, yes," she cried. "I forgot all about it. There is a thing you can do. Only you can do." "Is there?" cried Ispot. "Tell me. I would die to help you." "You say you get thread for your weavers. Can you give some of your thread to me? I need it very much." And she told him of her trouble. Oh, how happy Ispot was! Here was at last the chance to repay the princess. He jumped up with a cry and danced around. "That is the easiest thing in the world to do," he said. "I will go straight back and get it for you. We have no thread in stock because we were getting ready for the winter sleep, but we can get it from the grass in no time. Goodbye, princess. I will see you later." Down the mountain and through the forest he ran. Reaching his home, he called out all his people and set them to work. In 2 minutes the field became alive with the spinners. Thousands and thousands of the green insects wallowed into the forest of grass and hewed down the stalks right and left, splitting them afterwards and drawing thread out of them. There was not a single spinner, however old or young, that did not come out to help. Many worked so earnestly that they forgot to eat or sleep. This continued for 3 days, at the end of which they had gathered more than enough to make the frost for 1 day. "Enough!" cried Ispot. "Now let's take this to the princess." Soon an army of the spinners, bearing the thread in small bundles, poured out of the field and raced toward the mountain. Reaching the loom, they unloaded themselves and watched the princess spin the thread into yarns and weave the yarns into frost. Afterwards they helped her spread the frost on the field. Thus the frost for the 15th day was made, and it was marvelous frost. It was like snow in whiteness, but more delicate in texture, and there were many beautiful patterns not found in any other frost. It sparkled in the sunlight like the diamond veil of the fairy queen. The king of Moonland, seeing this frost, was very much pleased. "She is a wonderful girl," he said to his queen. "Instead of neglecting her work in her sorrow and loneliness, she kept at her work every morning, and now has brought out such a wonderful frost. She must be pardoned. Not only that, she must be rewarded. I will make her the Queen of the Evening Star." So, the next full moon night, a rabbit came across the golden trail over the sea to take her home. The spinners made a great occasion of her departure, and as she started toward her home, they lined themselves up on the beach and waved their whiskers as hard as they could. End of section 20. Read by Laura Gibbs. End of Tales of 1927, a selection of folk tales, fables, and legends from books published in 1927 by various authors.